Hollywood has never been shy about stirring the pot, but long before the 1960s, filmmakers were already pushing boundaries that made censors sweat and audiences lean forward in shock. These weren't safe stories meant to comfort you. They were raw, daring, and often way ahead of their time. So here's the question. What happens when art refuses to play it safe? The answer is hidden in these films, and trust me, a few of them will surprise you. Babyface, 1933. Few films in Hollywood history slap the moral guardians of its time quite like Babyface. Released in the early 1930s during the notorious pre-code era, this Barbara Stanwyck classic didn't just challenge the rules, it gleefully smashed them. Stanwyck plays Lily Powers, a young woman from the wrong side of the tracks who learns early that the world doesn't hand out fairness. Her response? She decides to take what she wants by climbing the social ladder, using her charm, brains, and steely ambition to move from man to man, each relationship pulling her one rung higher. The movie didn't whisper about her motives, it shouted them, making no effort to disguise Lily's unapologetic drive. That alone made it scandalous in 1933. Audiences had never seen a female character so direct, so calculating, and yet so magnetic. And the censors absolutely hated it. In fact, Warner Brothers had to re-edit the film before release, softening the harshest lines and adjusting the ending just to avoid an outright ban. Even then, Babyface felt like dynamite in a theater. What makes it remarkable today is how bold it was in exposing hypocrisy. The production code was just around the corner, and Babyface practically forced its hand. Lily's story was a wake-up call to Hollywood's moral enforcers who cracked down even harder afterward. But that very rebellion is what gave the film its power. Watching it now, you can still feel its audacity radiating from the screen. Barbara Stanwyck didn't play Lily with shame or hesitation. She played her as a survivor in a crooked world. And that's why Babyface isn't just a product of its time. It's a bold piece of cinema history that still burns with defiance. Red-Headed Woman, 1932. If you thought Babyface was audacious, Red-Headed Woman hit Hollywood like a mischievous grin aimed squarely at the censors. Jean Harlow plays Lil Andrews, a brash secretary who refuses to stay in her lane. Her goal? Win over her wealthy married boss, shatter his marriage, and secure her own place in the world of privilege. She knows exactly what she wants, and she's not afraid to bulldoze tradition to get it. From the first scene, Harlow commands the screen with wit, sass, and a self-awareness that was practically unheard of in female characters of the early 30s. Her one-liners slice through the air like knives, and her determination leaves both the men around her and the audience in awe. But this wasn't just performance, it was provocation, the very idea of a woman. Openly using her smarts and audacity to chase money and power rattled the moral standards of the time. Censors pushed back hard, forcing rewrites and revisions, but even toned down. The film radiated rebellion. The boldest move? It refused to punish Harlow's character. Unlike the morality tales that usually ended with downfall or tragedy, Red-Headed Woman gave Lil resilience, wit, and a future. That was shocking. It told audiences that women could be unapologetically ambitious and still land on their feet. In retrospect, the film captures the spirit of the pre-code era better than most. It laughed at conventional morality while showcasing Harlow as the ultimate face of fearless glamour. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't a cautionary tale. She was a woman who wrote her own rules. And that's why Red-Headed Woman didn't just raise eyebrows, it raised the bar for bold storytelling. The Public Enemy, 1931. James Cagney didn't just star in The Public Enemy, he detonated it like a firecracker in the middle of Hollywood. Released at a time when gangster films were still experimenting with formula, this gritty drama gave the genre its teeth. Cagney's Tom Powers isn't a suave gentleman criminal. He's brutal, cocky, quick-tempered, and terrifyingly believable. The moment that cemented the movie's reputation came when Cagney shoved half a grapefruit into Mae Clark's face during breakfast. Audiences gasped. The scene was shocking, not just because of its suddenness, but because it revealed the ugly, casual cruelty behind the gangster's facade. Studios worried, censors fumed, but audiences couldn't look away. What made the film even more daring was its honesty about crime. Yes, there were flashy suits, cars, and the thrill of quick money, but there was also betrayal, blood, and the knowledge that no one escapes the life unscarred. It stripped away the glamour that earlier films often clung to. Instead of showing gangsters as romantic anti-heroes, it showed them as dangerous men on a path that always ended badly. Cagney's performance was so powerful that it forever defined him. Overnight, he became the face of Hollywood gangsterdom, cementing the archetype for decades. But the real boldness of The Public Enemy was how it refused to soften its edges. It didn't ask the audience to admire Tom Powers, it dared them to confront him. Nearly a century later, the film still carries the same punch. It's raw, unsettling, and a reminder that boldness in cinema sometimes comes not from spectacle, but from refusing to look away from the truth. Scarface, 1932. Howard Hawks' Scarface wasn't just bold, it was practically radioactive, inspired by the meteoric rise of real-life mobsters like Al Capone. The film was a grenade lobbed into a culture already jittery about organized crime. Paul Mooney's Tony Camonte isn't just ambitious, he's insatiable. Every frame of the film radiates his hunger for power, wealth, and dominance, and the violence that comes with it is startling, even by today's standards. Audiences in 1932 had never seen anything like it. Machine guns rattled through scenes with unrelenting force. Characters were mowed down in bloody gang wars, and the sense of danger was visceral. The censors reacted with outrage. The movie was delayed, chopped, and re-released with moral disclaimers plastered across the opening. Yet even that couldn't hide its audacity. The film's boldest stroke was its message. The tagline, "The world is yours," wasn't a slogan of hope, it was a warning. Tony's ruthless climb reflected not just gangland ambition, but the darker side of the American dream itself. Success at any cost. Power without morality. Greed unchecked. Scarface dared to hold up a mirror to society at large. For decades, critics debated whether it glorified crime. But watching it closely, it's clear Hawks and producer Howard Hughes wanted to shock audiences into recognizing the corruption around them. And shock it did. In some states, the movie was outright banned. In others, it was heavily censored. What makes it so bold today is how much of the gangster genre traces back to it. The DNA of Scarface runs through The Godfather, Goodfellas, even De Palma's 1983 remake. Back in 1932, though, it was something else entirely. A film so fearless it was almost reckless. A defiant masterpiece that made Hollywood nervous and audiences hungry for more. Freaks, 1932. Nowhere did Hollywood take a bigger gamble than with Todd Browning's Freaks. Coming off the success of Dracula, Browning was given creative freedom, and what he delivered stunned the industry. Instead of another gothic tale, he cast real circus performers, many with physical disabilities, and built a story around them. This wasn't a monster movie in the traditional sense. It didn't rely on shadows, capes, or fake scares. Instead, it turned the spotlight on human cruelty, revealing that the so-called normal people were the true villains. The plot centers on Cleopatra, a trapeze artist who marries Hans, a kind-hearted little person, only for his inheritance. Her scheme, along with her strongman lover, unravels when the sideshow performers realize they've been deceived. The infamous climax in the rain, mud-slicked, grotesque, unforgettable, showed the troupe crawling toward Cleopatra, chanting, "One of us, one of us." It was a moment that seared itself into cinema history. A primal reversal of power that left audiences rattled. But the boldness of Freaks wasn't only in its imagery, it was in its message. By making the outsiders the heroes and the beautiful characters the monsters, Browning flipped society's prejudices upside down. Audiences in 1932 weren't ready. Many theaters refused to show it, claiming it was exploitative or grotesque. In the UK, it was banned for over 3 decades. Even MGM, the studio behind it, distanced itself after furious backlash. Critics of the time called it too shocking, too unsettling, even revolting. But Browning wasn't trying to please. He was holding up a mirror, asking viewers to examine who truly deserved the label of freak. The irony, of course, is that the film was condemned for daring to humanize people who had long been hidden away. Today, Freaks is hailed as a cult masterpiece. Its raw, unapologetic defiance still resonates nearly a century later. Browning didn't just make a horror film, he made a social grenade. And when it went off, Hollywood scrambled to bury it. The fact that it still crawls back into our collective memory proves just how bold it really was. Ecstasy 1933. Few films carried as much whispered reputation into American theaters as Ecstasy. Originally made in Czechoslovakia, it arrived in the United States with a cloud of controversy already swirling around it. Starring the then unknown Hedy Lamarr, the film wasn't about gangsters or gunfights, it was about longing, freedom, and the messy truth of human desire. American audiences had never seen anything quite like it, and that alone made it explosive. When it finally hit U.S. theaters, the reaction was swift. Critics and moral watchdogs were outraged, while censors hacked away at the film, trimming what they saw as indecent. Ironically, every cut only made people more curious. Audiences who sought it out were stunned not only by the daring moments, but by the artistry. Gustav Machati, the director, shot the film with a painter's eye, lingering on natural landscapes, using silence and body language to say what words could not. At the center was Hedy Lamarr. Her performance wasn't polished Hollywood charm, it was raw, emotional, and startlingly modern. She wasn't a doll-like figure on display, but a woman expressing frustration, loneliness, and genuine yearning. That honesty made Ecstasy far bolder than any gangster picture of the era. For Lamarr, the film was both a breakthrough and a lifelong shadow. It put her name on the map, but also created an image Hollywood tried to control once she moved to America. To her credit, she went on to become not just a movie star, but an inventor whose contributions shaped modern technology. Looking back, Ecstasy is remembered less as a scandal and more as an act of courage. It was a film that refused to sanitize human emotion, daring to present its characters as flawed, impulsive people. In the 1930s, that honesty was revolutionary, and it's what makes the film bold even now. The Outlaw, 1943. Howard Hughes never played by the rules, and The Outlaw proved it. On the surface, it was a Western about Billy the Kid, Doc Holliday, and the rough edges of frontier life. But Hughes had another agenda. He wanted the film to showcase Jane Russell in a way audiences would never forget. And he succeeded. Before the film even premiered, the marketing campaign made waves. Posters of Russell leaning provocatively against haystacks were plastered everywhere, selling not the story, but her image. Censors were scandalized. The Production Code Administration tried to delay, cut, and bury the movie, claiming it was too suggestive. Hughes fought back with a stubborn determination, even redesigning costumes to push the envelope further. The film sat in limbo for years before finally being released in 1943, by which time its reputation was already legendary. And here's the twist. Beyond the publicity stunts, The Outlaw actually tinkered with the Western formula. Instead of endless shootouts, it slowed down to explore character psychology. Billy the Kid, played by Jack Boutel, wasn't just a cold outlaw. He was conflicted, insecure, and deeply human. The same applied to Walter Houston's Doc Holliday, adding nuance rarely seen in the genre at that point. Still, Jane Russell's presence overshadowed all else. She brought toughness and sensuality to the role of Rio, making her one of the earliest examples of a female character in a Western who wasn't a damsel or a background figure. The boldness of The Outlaw came from Hughes's audacity. He turned a standard genre picture into a cultural flashpoint. By thumbing his nose at authority, he ensured the film would live on less as a straightforward Western and more as a symbol of Hollywood's constant battle between art, commerce, and censorship. Double Indemnity, 1944. If film noir is a dark alley, then Double Indemnity is the flickering streetlight that defined the look. Directed by Billy Wilder and co-written with crime novelist Raymond Chandler, it became the template for nearly every noir that followed. Its boldness wasn't in explosions or spectacle, but in the way it peeled back the mask of everyday life to show the corruption hiding underneath. The story is deceptively simple. Fred McMurray plays Walter Neff, a slick insurance salesman who meets Barbara Stanwyck's Phyllis Dietrichson, a woman whose smile hides ice-cold calculation. Together, they plot to murder her husband and collect the insurance payout. It's a plan that looks airtight, but of course, it unravels in spectacular fashion. What made the film bold was the moral grayness of it all. The protagonists weren't glamorous heroes. They were ordinary people who let greed pull them down. Even Edward G. Robinson's Barton Keyes, the closest thing to a conscience in the film, is left shaken by the mess. It wasn't tidy. It wasn't safe. and that unsettled audiences in 1944. The film's visuals doubled down on the mood. Venetian blinds cast shadows across rooms like prison bars. Smoke swirled around whispered conspiracies, and every frame seemed to suggest that doom was creeping closer. It was stylish, yes, but also suffocatingly claustrophobic. Censors balked at the story. How could Hollywood allow murderers to be so captivating? How could audiences be asked to root even briefly for criminals? Wilder didn't care. He trusted viewers to handle the darkness. The gamble paid off, cementing the film as a masterpiece. Double Indemnity dared to show evil not as a distant force, but as something that could bloom in a living room. That was its audacity. And that's why, decades later, it still stands as one of the boldest films ever made. The Lost Weekend, 1945. In a decade dominated by patriotism and wartime heroics, The Lost Weekend hit like a thunderclap. Directed by Billy Wilder, the film ripped away Hollywood's glossy veil to show something raw and disturbing. A man consumed by addiction. Ray Milland's portrayal of Don Burnham, a writer spiraling through 4 days of alcohol-fueled desperation, was a revelation. Audiences weren't prepared. At the time, drinking was usually played for laughs or brushed aside as harmless. Wilder flipped that narrative completely. The film dragged viewers through dingy bars, cluttered apartments, and the terrifying hallucinations of a man falling apart. It wasn't glamorous. It was ugly, lonely, and painfully real. Milland's performance was fearless. He didn't soften Don into a tragic clown. He showed him as someone relatable, even likable, yet trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape. That recognition was what made the film sting. People saw themselves, or people they knew, in Don Burnham. The studio was nervous, fearing the public would reject such bleakness. Instead, the movie struck a nerve and went on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor. It was proof that boldness didn't have to mean spectacle, it could mean honesty. What makes The Lost Weekend stand out today is how modern it feels. It treated addiction not as a joke, but as a human struggle, decades before society began addressing it openly. Wilder dared to shine a light where Hollywood usually refused to look. Sometimes, the boldest thing a film can do is tell the truth. That's what The Lost Weekend did, and it's why it remains one of the most daring films of its era. Gentleman's Agreement, 1947. When Hollywood preferred glossy escapism, Gentleman's Agreement barreled headfirst into controversy. Directed by Elia Kazan and starring Gregory Peck, the film tackled anti-Semitism in post-war America, something most studios considered too risky for audiences. Peck plays Philip Schuyler Green, a journalist who pretends to be Jewish in order to experience firsthand the discrimination faced by his neighbors, co-workers, and supposed friends. What he discovers isn't just open hatred, but 1,000 little cuts, housing denials, polite exclusions, whispered slights at dinner parties. It was a mirror held up to society, and many didn't like what they saw. The boldness of Gentleman's Agreement came from its refusal to sugarcoat. At a time when Hollywood often tiptoed around controversy, the film said the quiet part out loud. Anti-Semitism wasn't just the problem of extremists, it was woven into the everyday fabric of American life. Not surprisingly, it stirred uproar. Some critics applauded its courage. Others blasted it as bad for business. Studio executives feared it would alienate audiences. Instead, it became a sensation, winning 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The debate it sparked was exactly the point. It forced Americans to confront prejudice where they least expected it in themselves. Gregory Peck's performance anchored the film, delivering integrity and restraint in equal measure. Kazan's direction, meanwhile, gave the story urgency without melodrama. Together, they created a piece of cinema that was as challenging as it was compelling. Even today, Gentleman's Agreement feels bold because its message still resonates. Prejudice doesn't always scream. It often whispers. And by daring to reveal those whispers on screen, the film secured its place as one of the bravest stories of its time. The Snake Pit, 1948. In an era when most films painted rosy pictures of family life, wartime heroics, or romantic escapism, The Snake Pit dragged audiences into territory Hollywood almost never dared to tread. The harsh reality of mental illness, Starring Olivia de Havilland in one of her most fearless roles, the film followed Virginia Cunningham, a woman institutionalized after a breakdown. What audiences witnessed wasn't glamour or melodrama, it was the claustrophobic life inside a psychiatric hospital, where treatments ranged from sympathetic counseling to electroshock therapy that left viewers squirming in their seats. At the time, talking openly about mental health was nearly taboo. The average moviegoer had never seen these struggles portrayed with such unflinching realism. De Havilland didn't soften her performance for comfort. She played Virginia as confused, frightened, and heartbreakingly human, capturing the vulnerability of someone caught between her own fractured mind and a system trying, sometimes cruelly, to fix her. The boldness of The Snake Pit lay in stripping away stigma. It didn't sensationalize or turn illness into spectacle. Instead, it highlighted both the humanity of patients and the inadequacies of institutions. Scenes of crowded wards and harsh staff treatment rattled audiences unused to confronting these realities. Remarkably, the film sparked change. Advocacy groups praised it for raising awareness, and its influence contributed to calls for reform in mental health care. For de Havilland, it became one of the defining performances of her career, proving she wasn't just a glamorous star, but an actress unafraid of difficult truths. Watching The Snake Pit today, you can still feel the courage behind it. In a time when Hollywood sold fantasies, this film gave audiences truth, and that's why it remains one of the boldest pictures of the 1940s. A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951. If The Snake Pit rattled nerves, A Streetcar Named Desire practically tore the roof off Hollywood's rulebook. Adapted from Tennessee Williams's scorching play, the film brought bruised psyches and raw relationships to the big screen with a force that still resonates. This wasn't polite melodrama. It was sweat, rage, and heartbreak laid bare. Marlon Brando exploded onto the screen as Stanley Kowalski, a character so primal and unpredictable that he redefined screen acting overnight. He wasn't polished or theatrical. He was raw nerve endings, a man whose physicality and volatility dominated every scene. Opposite him, Vivien Leigh gave one of her most layered performances as Blanche Dubois, a fragile woman clinging to illusions while reality mercilessly tore them apart. Their scenes together weren't just dramatic, they were combustible, charged with an intensity that made censors scramble to tone things down. The subject matter alone made studios sweat. It explored family dysfunction, fractured identities, and simmering tension that challenged the glossy Hollywood norm. Williams' story had already shocked theater audiences, and even in its toned-down film version, the emotional brutality remained intact. Audiences left theaters shaken. Some critics hailed it as a masterpiece, while others accused it of being too raw, too dark. But its impact was undeniable. Streetcar didn't whisper, it roared. It opened the floodgates for more mature, unflinching storytelling in American cinema, showing that audiences were ready for art that cut deeper than comfort. The boldness of A Streetcar Named Desire wasn't just in what it showed, it was in what it unleashed. Brando became a symbol of a new kind of acting, and Hollywood could never go back to the old ways. The Wild One, 1953. Hey Johnny, what are you rebelling against? That line, and Marlon Brando's casual reply, "What do you got?" perfectly captured why The Wild One wasn't just a movie, but a cultural spark. Before this film, American teenagers were usually portrayed as clean-cut kids headed for college or sock hops. But Brando's biker gang rolled into town like a thunderstorm, bringing leather jackets, engines rumbling, and a simmering sense of defiance. Parents hated it. Kids were enthralled. Censors panicked. The film wasn't simply about a gang causing trouble in a small town. It was about generational tension boiling over. Brando's Johnny wasn't a clear villain or hero. He was restless, unpredictable, and magnetic, embodying a kind of rebellion that mainstream America wasn't ready to see. The imagery was iconic. Black leather, tilted caps, motorcycles lined up like an invading army. It set the template for decades of rebel characters. Teenagers, for the first time, saw themselves portrayed as restless and misunderstood, instead of obedient and idealized. The film's boldness rattled authorities beyond the U.S. The British Board of Film Censors banned it for 14 years, claiming it glorified gang behavior. In truth, the movie wasn't encouraging chaos, it was reflecting a society struggling to understand its youth. Watching the wild one now, it may seem tame compared to modern depictions of rebellion. But in 1953, it was a cultural earthquake. It cracked open the door for Rebel Without a Cause and countless counterculture films to come. This wasn't just another Hollywood drama. It was a declaration that a new, louder generation had arrived. Blackboard Jungle, 1955. Before Hollywood fully embraced youth culture, Blackboard Jungle walked into theaters like a live grenade. Starring Glenn Ford as a well-meaning teacher assigned to an inner-city high school, the film shocked audiences by pulling no punches in its portrayal of juvenile delinquency. This wasn't a polished picture of classroom life, it was gritty, chaotic, and unsettlingly real. The boldness came from two fronts. First, it addressed taboo subjects head-on: violence in schools, racial tensions, and the generational clash between authority figures and restless teenagers. Sidney Poitier, in one of his earliest breakout roles, embodied that tension, bringing dignity and intensity to a role that refused to play into stereotypes. Second, it introduced something utterly new to mainstream audiences: rock and roll. Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock blared over the opening credits, igniting a cultural earthquake. For many, it was the first time rock music exploded out of a theater sound system, and it terrified parents as much as it electrified teenagers. Censors bristled. Critics warned it would inspire copycat violence. Some schools even banned students from attending, but its impact was undeniable. Blackboard Jungle forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about its youth and the cracks forming in post-war conformity. Today, the film is remembered not just for its message, but for its spark. It opened the door for teen-centered dramas, inspired countless imitators, and helped kickstart rock and roll's march into mainstream culture. In 1955, that made it more than just a movie. It was a cultural alarm bell ringing loud and clear. Some Like It Hot, 1959. As the 1950s closed, Hollywood seemed stuck in safe formulas. Then Billy Wilder unleashed Some Like It Hot, a comedy so daring it blew the hinges off tradition. On the surface, it was farce. Two musicians, Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, disguised themselves as women to hide from gangsters, joining an all-female band. But beneath the laughs was a bold challenge to rigid norms. Wilder leaned into absurdity with razor-sharp wit. Curtis and Lemmon weren't just playing dress-up, they were upending ideas of gender and identity in ways audiences had never seen. The comedy poked fun at propriety, romance, and society's rigid rules, all while keeping the pace as fast as a jazz number. And then there was Marilyn Monroe. As Sugarcane, she delivered one of her most iconic performances. Funny, vulnerable, and unforgettable. Her presence gave the film warmth and charisma that made it irresistible. What truly made it bold was its ending. When Lemon's suitor refuses to back down after learning the truth, he shrugs and delivers the immortal line, "Well, nobody's perfect." It was a wink to audiences that the world was changing, that conventions could be laughed at and bent without disaster. Some Like It Hot became one of the greatest comedies ever made, but more importantly, it signaled Hollywood's readiness to step into a new, more daring decade. The laughter was the sugarcoat. The boldness was the message underneath. From ruthless gangsters to rebellious teens, from scandalous romances to comedies that dared to laugh at the rules, these films prove that boldness didn't start in the 1960s. It was brewing long before. Each one took risks that rattled censors, shocked audiences, and redefined what Hollywood could be. So, which of these daring classics left the biggest mark on you? Drop your thoughts below. And if you love uncovering the untamed side of film history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The story of bold cinema is far from over.